I re-enlisted in the Army to save our mortgage, only for my wife to rent out our house and move in with another man, claiming I was gone for too long. And this is what I found in our garage. I suppose I should start with the moment my wife, Amber, sent me the text. It wasn't the most important thing I received during the year and a half I was on extended duty, but it was the first step toward the complete mess that followed. Get here. As soon as possible. No punctuation, no emojis. Just a dry text. At the time, I thought maybe our 8-year-old son, Jacob, was sick. Or maybe something happened to the car. I had only extended my service for them, for the mortgage on our house in Aurora, which we were barely managing to pay. Amber was working part-time, and our combined income was barely enough until I got the promotion and signed the new contract with the bonus pay. It gave us stability and the chance to clear the debt over the next 5 years without losing everything we had built over 10 years of marriage. I did it for us. When I flew in, the first thing I did was take a cab to our house. It was about 10 in the evening. I was exhausted, the flight, the time difference, but inside, a small spark of joy was burning. I would see Jacob and Amber. I would see my home. The cab driver stopped, and I immediately felt something was wrong. The house looked strange. Tidy, even too tidy, but not ours. There were unfamiliar flower pots on the porch. Lights were on in the windows, and the shadows inside clearly didn't belong to my family. I walked up to the door and was about to take out my key when I noticed a small, taped-up piece of paper on the door frame. It was a handwritten notice. Temporarily for rent. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Was this some kind of stupid joke? A prank? But I called. I dialed the number. After 2 rings, Amber picked up on the other end. I just said, "What the hell is this, Amber?" There was a moment of silence, heavy like a concrete slab, and then she spoke in her usual slightly monotonous voice, as if discussing the weather. "Daniel, you arrived. I asked you to hurry. Look, the house is rented out. I needed the money to move. I rented an apartment, and I'm there now with Jacob. You don't need to knock. No one is expecting you." I felt the world around me shrink to the size of that damn porch. Me, the man who spent the last year and a half looking down the barrel of a gun to save this place, this damn piece of lawn and lumber. You rented out our house? Our house? Amber? Where are you?" I was practically screaming. She took a breath that sounded like a deep sigh of disappointment, the kind you make when someone doesn't understand a simple thing. "I'm in South Beach, Daniel. I'm with Matthew, and I rented the house because I needed to survive while you were gone. You were gone for too long. And by the way, Matthew is a huge help with Jacob. Understand? It's not my fault that you—" My brain just shut off. She moved to some Matthew with my son and rented out the only thing that connected me to home. I threw my phone down and just stared at the house that was no longer mine. Couldn't just leave. I walked around the house and tried to open the garage door. It was locked, but I knew the spare key always hung on a nail behind the downspout. I found it and the lock clicked open. The light didn't work, but a dim moonlight streamed through the small window, and that's what I saw. In the center of the garage, neatly covered with a tarp, stood my old Ford that I had left behind. Next to it on the floor, under a stack of old newspapers, was a box. My old Army gearbox. I lifted the tarp, and underneath there was no car. On the concrete floor stood only an empty shell, stripped of the engine, the transmission, even most of the interior. The car was dead. And in the box, under the newspapers, there were only our wedding photos and, strangest of all, half of my dog tags. The other half was always on me. Why did she leave them here? This was not just betrayal. This was destruction. And I realized this month was going to be the most hellish month of my life. I just stood there, in the darkness, my hands shaking from the powerlessness and the rage that was starting to boil deep inside. This wasn't just a story about infidelity. It was about someone taking your life and stripping it for parts. The landlord who rented my house to strangers sent me a text, and the name he used for my wife almost made me call the police. The betrayal was deeper than just a new man and a rental agreement. I stood in that empty garage for what felt like an hour, maybe 2. The cold from the concrete was seeping into my boots, but I barely felt it. All I could feel was this heavy, suffocating silence, and the sight of my stripped-down car. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was the project I'd been planning to finish with Jacob when I got back. We talked about repainting it and taking it camping. Now it was just scrap metal and a monument to how completely I'd misjudged everything. The dog tags, half of them lying in that box next to our grinning wedding faces, felt like a literal division of my identity. She had cut me in half, leaving the useless parts behind. I finally snapped out of it when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Hey Daniel, it's John. I'm the landlord who leased the property at 421 Crestview. Sorry about the confusion, but your wife didn't mention you were due back so soon. Can you collect the rest of your belongings from the storage unit by Monday? The current tenants complained about clutter in the garage. Thanks, John." The landlord. He used the word so casually, so professionally, as if he was talking about an apartment I'd moved out of years ago, not the home I bought with my blood and sweat. And then I noticed something else in his text, something small that hit harder than the betrayal itself. He referred to her as Mrs. Smith. My name is Daniel Miller. Amber's maiden name was Wilson. Smith was the surname of her previous husband, the one she divorced before we met, the one she always said was a mistake she wanted to forget. Why was she using that name now? My hands, which had just been trembling, now felt steady, coiled. This wasn't a sudden, heat-of-the-moment thing. This was planned. The car, the rental, the fake name. I didn't reply to John. Instead, I drove to the storage facility he mentioned. It was late, past midnight, but I had to see it. It was a cheap industrial park on the outskirts of town. I found the unit number John had given, Unit B14. I punched in the code Amber had always used for everything important, our anniversary date. It worked. The unit was packed, floor to ceiling, with the remnants of my life. My uniforms sealed in plastic bins. Jacob's old high chair, dusty and forgotten. My grandmother's antique clock, which I specifically told Amber was the one thing I wanted displayed. Everything that made that house ours was dumped here. But it was organized. Too organized. As if an objective third party had carefully cataloged the end of our marriage. I didn't stay long. I couldn't bear to rifle through the physical wreckage of my past. But I did find one small, unlocked jewelry box tucked into a box of linens. Inside, under a cheap silver bracelet, was Amber's laptop. I knew her password. It was her birthday. I grabbed the laptop and drove straight to the nearest 24-hour diner. I needed coffee and I needed answers. I logged in. The wallpaper was a photo of Amber and Jacob on a beach, smiling. Matthew wasn't in the shot, but the location looked suspiciously like the South Beach she mentioned. I went straight to her email. The whole story unfolded in a series of digital breadcrumbs. It started subtly. Emails to an attorney, 6 months ago, asking about the legal implications of a military spouse renting out a jointly owned property while the owner was deployed. Then, 3 months ago, dozens of emails with Matthew Sullivan. Not just flirty notes, but detailed, professional conversations about financing. Matthew wasn't just some rebound guy. He was an investment broker, someone with serious money and, apparently, a desire to sink it into property. One email, dated exactly a month ago, caught my eye. It was from Matthew to Amber, using the Smith surname, confirming the transfer of a large sum of money. The subject line was, "Closing the gap. Deposit confirmed." What gap? What deposit? It was far too much money for just moving expenses or even a year's rent on a new apartment. This wasn't just cheating. This was some kind of financial scheme that involved our family home, a rental contract with a fake name, and an investment broker. I closed the laptop, the screen reflecting my face. Tired, unshaven, and now utterly cold. The emotional shock was giving way to a calculated, dangerous calm. The last year and a half of self-sacrifice, the military contract, the grueling hours. It all felt like I had been digging my own financial grave for her to climb out of and into a new life. And the worst part? She had used my absence, the very thing I did for their security, as her main justification. You were gone for too long. I knew I couldn't confront her yet. Not when she had Jacob. I needed to know the full extent of this closing the Gap transaction, and why she was hiding behind an ex-husband's name. This wasn't just a marital breakdown. This felt like something that crossed a legal line. My deployment had given her the perfect cover for a month-long operation, and I had exactly 4 weeks to figure out how deep the rot went and how to fight back without losing my son. I confronted my wife with the bank statements and the rental contract she signed with the name of her ex-husband. Her response? She told me the only reason I extended my service was because I was a coward who couldn't handle real life. Then she dropped the legal bomb about my son. I spent the next 48 hours living in my old truck, the one I'd left at the base parking lot and picked up the day after I found the garage empty. The laptop was my base of operations. The emails confirmed my worst fear. Amber and Matthew weren't just shacking up. They were systematically leveraging my military income and the equity in our home. The closing the Gap transfer was a $150,000 lump sum from Matthew to Amber, executed the day she signed the lease agreement with John, the supposed landlord. The money was routed through a holding company, Matthew's doing, I was sure, and then immediately used to pay off a substantial portion of our primary mortgage. This wasn't just paying rent to move out. This was a hostile takeover of my financial stability. Matthew essentially bought a stake in our house, making Amber's position stronger and mine weaker, all while I was gone, trusting her. She had manipulated my service contract, my dedication to stability, and turned it into her leverage. I had to confront her. Staying hidden was only giving them time to solidify their plan. I found the address for her new place in South Beach from an electricity bill attached to one of her emails. A high-rise condo, the kind you buy, not rent. I drove the whole way in a day, the distance doing nothing to calm the rage and cold calculation inside me. I arrived at the condo building in the late afternoon. I didn't announce myself. I found her apartment number and simply pressed the buzzer. When she opened the door, she wasn't surprised. It was like she'd been expecting the reckoning, but she was entirely unbothered. She was dressed in new, expensive casual clothes. Her hair was lighter. She looked like a woman who had just shed a very heavy skin. "Daniel," she said, stepping aside, but not inviting me in. Matthew's shoes were by the door. "You finally made it. Did John give you the keys to your storage unit?" I told him to. I didn't move past the threshold. I held up the printouts I had bundled. The bank statement showing Matthew's transfer, the rental agreement she signed as Amber Smith, and the email about closing the Gap. "Don't give me that John nonsense, Amber," I said, my voice low and steady. It was the calm before the thunder. "I know about Matthew. I know you used my deployment to pull off this financial stunt. Explain this $150,000 deposit. Explain why you're using your ex-husband's last name on a lease that legally ties me to tenants I didn't approve." Her face didn't falter. She actually smirked, a small, ugly twist of her mouth. "I was securing our future, Daniel. The one you abandoned for a paycheck. That $150,000 is an investment in my stability, which, by extension, is an investment in Jacob's. Matthew is financially secure. You were dragging us down with that house. That contract you signed? That was a 5-year sentence of me being alone, watching the bills pile up, while you played hero overseas. You think I didn't see through that? You didn't extend your service for us, Daniel. You did it because you're a coward who can't handle the pressure of real life, real responsibility, without the safety net of the uniform." That word, coward, cut deeper than any of the financial revelations. I had risked my life, lived in danger, and signed away 5 years of my existence to keep the roof over their heads, and she dismissed it as a cowardly escape. "Don't you dare," I growled, taking a step toward her. "I didn't run from anything. I made a sacrifice, and you repaid it by tearing my life apart and involving my son in your little scam." She leaned closer, her eyes flashing, finally showing a raw, cold emotion that wasn't boredom. "Scam? No, I'm giving him a better life. Matthew has already started the adoption paperwork, Daniel. You're listed as absent father due to your long-term, self-imposed deployment. The court will see that Matthew is a constant, stable presence, and you are a seasonal visitor. You chose the Army over us, Daniel, And now you're going to pay the price for choosing to be gone too long. The bottom fell out of my world. Adoption. She wasn't just taking my house and my money. She was trying to take my son, using the one thing I did for his benefit, the extended contract, as the legal weapon against me. The tension in the hallway was so thick, I could barely breathe. The air was charged, dangerous. I glanced quickly past her and into the apartment. A small, framed photo of Jacob and Matthew, laughing, was on a nearby table. This wasn't just about money. It was about replacing me entirely. I realized then that my fight wasn't against Amber's infidelity. It was a desperate, month-long battle for my identity as a father. I had to leave before I did something that would permanently damage my case. I had to find a different kind of weapon. My lawyer told me I had no chance against the absent father claims unless I could prove financial fraud. I flew back and broke into Matthew's downtown office using a skill I learned overseas. What I found on his encrypted drive wasn't just about my house or my wife, it was about 5 other families. I was facing a choice: save my life or save theirs. I drove away from that condo like a ghost, the words absent father and adoption paperwork echoing louder than the truck's engine. Amber's casual cruelty had shifted the battlefield entirely. It wasn't about the mortgage anymore. It was about Jacob, my lawyer, Kevin, a buddy from my early service days who now specialized in family law, confirmed the chilling reality. In some states, especially when one parent is voluntarily and perpetually absent due to deployment extensions, proving abandonment for adoption isn't impossible, particularly if the new partner can demonstrate superior financial stability and continuous presence. Kevin was blunt. My chances were slim unless I could prove Amber's motives were malicious and, more importantly, illegal. The judge won't care about a simple affair, Daniel, Kevin explained over a secure line. They care about the child's best interest. You need a smoking gun that proves she's not financially stable, or that Matthew is engaged in something truly unethical. Prove fraud related to the house, and we can argue she's an unfit mother prioritizing ill-gotten gains over the kid. But we need hard proof of Matthew's actions, not just emails. Matthew Sullivan, the man who wore my life as his new coat. I knew I couldn't get what I needed legally. Matthew was an investment broker, dealing in large-scale transactions, and he wouldn't leave physical evidence lying around. His money and his connections were too strong. But I had a different set of skills I acquired in places Amber called my cowardly escape. I drove straight back to Aurora. I researched Matthew's firm online, a slick, boutique operation downtown. I found the building's floor plan, its security protocols, and shift changes through publicly available records and a little extra digging I won't detail. The uniform had taught me 2 things well: how to observe and how to infiltrate. 2 nights later, at 3 a.m., I was in Matthew's office. It was quiet, sterile, and cold. I bypassed the door lock faster than it takes to make coffee. I went straight for Matthew's desk. But everything was clean. No paperwork, no client files, only his work laptop, locked down with a triple-layer password and advanced encryption. This was the hardest part. I didn't have hours. I had minutes. Using a small external device I'd kept in my gear bag, I exploited a minor vulnerability in the system's boot sequence, a technique far too complex for anyone outside a specific, specialized unit to even attempt. I cracked the drive. The files weren't just about the $150,000 to Amber. That was just the tip of a massive iceberg. Matthew wasn't an ethical broker. He was running a systematic mortgage fraud scheme. He was targeting military families like ours, families with one spouse deployed, high-equity homes, and a financially struggling partner at home. He would seduce the isolated spouse. Amber was one of at least 5 I found in the documents. Convince them to use his investment capital to pay down the mortgage, and in return, the spouse would sign over power of attorney or sign a quitclaim deed under the guise of an investment partnership. Then, using the deployed spouse's stable military income as collateral, Matthew would secure massive, over-leveraged loans on the properties he now partially controlled. My mortgage payoff was a small investment for him, a token to hook Amber into signing over everything else. The documents showed he was planning to seize full control of our house within the next 30 days. before the adoption papers were processed and before I had time to file a legal counterclaim. Amber was an accessory, knowingly or not, to grand-scale fraud and possibly money laundering. But here was the twist, the heavy, gut-wrenching dilemma. The encrypted file contained the details of 5 other families in similar situations, all military, all deployed, all about to lose their homes to Matthew's scheme, potentially within the same month. I had the power to expose him, to hand this entire data dump to the FBI. That would save 5 families, ruin Matthew, and instantly secure my case against Amber, giving me full custody of Jacob. But if I did that, the investigation would be immediate, public, and brutal. Amber would be arrested as an accessory. Jacob would see his mother led away in handcuffs, and the resulting media frenzy would scar him for life. My choice was simple, yet unbearable. Use the evidence to legally destroy Matthew and Amber, save my home, and get Jacob, but shatter my son's life by sending his mother to prison. Or, keep the evidence hidden, fight Amber in court only on the absent father grounds, and risk losing Jacob to save his mother from jail. I sat there, the data copied onto a tiny thumb drive, the future of 6 families, including mine, hanging on my decision. The clock was ticking, not just on my house, but on the adoption hearing, which was scheduled for the end of the month. I had the weapon, but using it felt like a betrayal of the promise I made to Jacob years ago, to always protect his mother. I walked into the custody hearing with the thumb drive holding the evidence that could send my wife to prison and save 5 families. But when Jacob looked at me from across the room, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. The court was silent, and that's when Matthew made his final, deadly mistake. I couldn't sleep for the last week of the month. The moral calculus I was performing was tearing me apart. Every time I looked at the tiny thumb drive hidden under the seat of my truck, I saw Jacob's face. He was 8. He loved his mother, regardless of how thoroughly she had betrayed me. Sending Amber to jail would save our home, secure my custody, and expose a massive fraud that would protect 5 other unsuspecting military families. It was the righteous, logical, and just military solution. But it would devastate Jacob. He would lose both his parents in a single catastrophic stroke. A father who jailed his mother, and a mother who disappeared into the system. I called Kevin the night before the hearing. I told him I had leverage, undeniable proof of fraud, but I didn't specify the details. "Daniel, you have to use it," Kevin insisted, his voice tight with desperation. "This is your life. This is Jacob's future. The kid needs stability, not a mother who's an accomplice to a financial terrorist. You have one shot. File the police report with this evidence." We walk into that courtroom tomorrow morning with an FBI investigation against Matthew and Amber, and the custody issue is over before it starts. "You win." "And Jacob loses," I replied, staring out at the empty street. I didn't spend a year and a half in a combat zone just to inflict a new, different kind of trauma on my son. "I'm not doing it, Kevin." I showed up to the courthouse the next morning with the thumb drive in the pocket of my best suit. I felt like I was walking into a different kind of war. Amber and Matthew were already there, seated at the opposing table with their high-powered, smug attorney. Matthew gave me a tight, condescending smile. Amber looked through me, completely devoid of emotion, like I was a piece of furniture she was ready to discard. Then Jacob walked in. A court-appointed counselor led him in, and he looked small and scared in the huge, silent room. He didn't run to Amber, and he didn't run to me. He just stopped, scanning our faces. When his eyes finally met mine, his face crumpled a little, and he gave me a barely perceptible nod, a silent recognition that spoke volumes about how much he missed me, how much he needed things to be normal. That nod decided it. The judge called the hearing to order. Amber's attorney immediately launched into the absent father narrative, citing my extended contract as proof of my inability to prioritize my family, painting Matthew as the stabilizing, present father figure. They presented their evidence for the immediate adoption: Matthew's wealth, the stability of the new condo, and my prolonged absence. When it was my turn, Kevin started to challenge the financial claims Amber had made. He brought up the suspiciously large deposit and the abrupt change in financial behavior. He was laying the groundwork, waiting for me to give him the signal for the thumb drive. The room went silent, waiting for my counterattack. I looked at Amber. I looked at Matthew, whose eyes were fixed on me, a confident, slightly amused expression on his face. I knew exactly what he was thinking. He had calculated every move, and I was just an angry, expendable soldier who had run out of time. I slid the thumb drive out of my pocket. My hand was steady. I placed it, not on Kevin's stack of papers, but gently, almost ceremoniously, on the edge of the judge's bench. "Your Honor," I said, my voice cutting across the room, deliberate and calm. "I have evidence here that will not only discredit Mrs. Miller's financial claims, but will also expose a systemic, multifamily fraud operation run by Mr. Sullivan that reaches far beyond this custody hearing. This evidence would result in immediate criminal proceedings for both Mr. Sullivan and potentially Mrs. Miller as an accessory." A wave of panic washed over Matthew's face, shattering his confidence. Amber just stared white-knuckled. "However," I continued, never taking my eyes off the judge, "I am not submitting this evidence today. I will not be the one to destroy my son's life by putting his mother in prison, regardless of her actions. My primary concern is Jacob's well-being, and fracturing his life further with a criminal trial is not in his best interest. I ask the court to deny the adoption based on the fraud, which I will report separately through legal channels after the custody matter is settled, to ensure Mr. Sullivan cannot harm other families." The room was absolutely silent. The judge looked at the drive, then at me, then at Amber, confusion warring with shock. Then Matthew made his critical mistake. He couldn't help himself. He snapped, lunging halfway across the table, his voice loud and panicked. "You son of a b, you can't. The evidence is fabricated. That's classified military equipment. He broke into my office. He's a threat." That was it. Matthew, the stable, controlled broker, just confessed to two things: that the evidence was real, and that he was willing to lose his composure in front of the judge. The judge slammed her gavel down, her face set hard. "Mr. Sullivan, sit down. Counselor, I am seizing this evidence for immediate review. And Mr. Miller, your statements about the well-being of your son, despite the clear legal advantage you just waived, have been noted. The adoption is immediately denied. I am issuing a temporary restraining order against Mr. Sullivan concerning the minor child, pending a full investigation into your claims of fraud. This hearing is adjourned." I left the courthouse knowing I had won the custody battle for now. But the war wasn't over. I had saved Amber from prison, at least for the moment, but I had not forgiven her. I walked out and found Jacob, who ran straight into my arms, clinging to my uniform shirt. Later that evening, sitting with Jacob in a hotel room, away from the chaos, I finally looked at my dog tags, the half I still wore, and the half she had left behind. I realized the true cost of my extended contract wasn't the 5 years I gave the Army, but the 10 years of marriage I lost. I saved 5 families, but I would now have to navigate the impossible terrain of co-parenting with a woman I could no longer trust, while she still faced the music for the fraud Matthew had dragged her into. I chose the ethical high ground, but the ground beneath my feet felt more unstable than ever. I was back, but my life, like the car in the garage, was permanently stripped down.